How much does surrogacy cost for a gay couple? Well, it mirrors the same cost as it does for any other couple in a lot of ways, but there are some differences. Stick around and we'll talk about them. What's up? I'm Corlandos Scott, a surrogacy attorney in Los Angeles, and that basically means that my practice revolves around helping people grow their families through surrogacy. And in today's episode, we'll cover the requirements involved in a gay couple's surrogacy arrangements, and we're going to talk about the typical cost of surrogacy. So let's do it. One of the wonders of surrogacy is that it makes it possible for gay couples to make their dreams of having a child a reality. And they can achieve that dream in a way that allows them to be genetically related to their children. But how much does surrogacy cost if you're a gay couple? Well, let me get this out of the way up front. Does the fact of being gay alone affect the cost of surrogacy? No, it's definitely not like, there's a hetero fee and a gay fee. It's definitely not like that. Now, what you will find, though, is how gay intended parents arrive at the surrogacy process may be different from how a heterosexual couple arrives at the surrogacy process. For instance, a gay couple will certainly require a gamete donor in order to create embryos. But that does not necessarily distinguish the cost of their journey from that of a hetero couple. Heterosexual couples oftentimes require an egg or sperm donor also. However, before we cover the typical cost, there is a slight nuance that's unique to my typical gay couples. And I see more of my same-sex male clients request this, and that's a 2-embryo transfer. And I have more of my same-sex male clients request this than any other type of client. Now, this was acceptable back then, in part because oftentimes transferring multiple embryos still really only resulted in a singleton pregnancy. You have to remember, back in those days, the process of thawing out a frozen embryo was so crude that you often lost embryos in the thaw process. But as science and medicine have improved, the success of single embryo transfers has risen, and it has risen almost to the point where reproductive endocrinologists prefer to only transfer one embryo at a time. Now, the other reason that fertility doctors now lean toward 1-embryo transfers is because of the increased risk of a multiples pregnancy when transferring more than 1 embryo at a time. And listen, a high multiples pregnancy is a high risk pregnancy where the carrier and the fetuses take on the additional risk. So this is why you see a lot of doctors advise against multiple embryo transfers. Nonetheless, many of my same-sex male clients want a 2-embryo transfer. And why is that? Well, not because they think the single embryo transfer won't work, but rather because they desire to have twins. One with embryos created with the sperm of father 1, and another with embryos created with the sperm of father 2. This way, each father has a child that is genetically related to him. And this happens to me all the time, and I'm not against this family building plan, but I like to be realistic with my clients. So we always have a discussion around the issue that accompanies this plan. So since we're already talking about it, let's you and I have that discussion now. Now, it's not impossible to execute this plan, but it takes a coordinated effort. And what I mean by that is more than just the parents need to be on board with this. First of all, the intended parents should consider this and disclose this desired plan when you're looking to match with a surrogate. You don't want to spend tons of time, effort, and money matching with a surrogate without disclosing this to her, only to find out that when she reads multiple embryo transfer in the contract and reads twins in the contract, she tells you, no thank you, I'm not on board for that. So please make sure you only match with a surrogate who's not only willing to carry twins, but who is also willing to have 2 embryos transferred to her uterus. Stick with me because there's a difference between those two things. There are many surrogates who say, I will carry twins if they occur naturally, but I'm only willing to do a single embryo transfer. So in other words, the surrogate is saying, we're willing to carry twins that result from the splitting of a single transferred embryo. But what I'm not willing to do is I don't want to force the issue of twins by transferring 2 embryos to begin with. And their logic is, what if you transfer 2 embryos, put them inside me, and both of those embryos split, and now I end up carrying quadruplets? I know, that's highly unlikely. You're probably more likely to get struck by lightning. But these are the types of things that go through surrogates' minds. I know, I represent them all the time and I hear these comments. You must also make sure that your reproductive endocrinologist is on board with this plan. Like I mentioned, many reproductive endocrinologists have veered away from conducting 2 embryo transfers due to the risk that it poses to the surrogate and the potential fetuses. Remember, your fertility doctor has taken a Hippocratic oath to do no harm. And if they feel that a course of treatment like a 2 embryo transfer is ethically questionable, well, then they may not perform it. So make sure that if this is something that you want, you work with an RE or reproductive endocrinologist who's also open to this. Okay, now that I have that nuance out of the way, let's cover some typical costs. And do me a favor, smash that like button if you like this video. It would mean the absolute world to me. In fact, these videos are free because I like you. My only ask is that you share it with someone you like. You know, the old pay it forward. Okay, the typical cost. Now, generally, how much it would cost to have a gestational carrier depends on a lot of factors, and they're typically divided into 2 main categories: compensated surrogacy and altruistic surrogacy. Now, in compensated surrogacy, there's the base compensation, and then there's all the other expenses in the surrogate's benefits package, or what she agreed to initially. And when I say benefits package, I'm talking about the arrangement and all the costs that are typically associated with the surrogacy process, including the base pay. Now, in altruistic surrogacy arrangements, although you don't pay the gestational carrier a base pregnancy compensation, there's still some costs involved. But let's talk about compensated surrogacy first. What factors into base compensation? Well, base compensation is going to depend on experience. Is she a first-time surrogate who's unproven in surrogacy, or is she a repeat surrogate who has proven success in being a surrogate? Where does she live geographically? Oftentimes, California surrogates, because of the cost of living in California, demand more than maybe an Oklahoma surrogate would or an Idaho surrogate would. Now, the experience of a surrogate also relates to how many successful pregnancies she's had and whether she's been a gestational carrier before. And these are things that give you peace of mind. And with that peace of mind, there's a little bit of a premium that you pay for it. So let me give you a range that I've seen with gestational carriers, which is probably going to drive you bananas, but it's the true range that I've seen with gestational carriers nonetheless. I've seen the base compensation for gestational carriers range from $30,000 for the base compensation all the way to $130,000 for surrogates who've had a number of successful surrogacy arrangements and they were specialists actually in medical fields like nurses or RNs. So of course they had a different demand for their surrogate services. However, the typical range that I see for first-time surrogates in, let's say, California is around $40,000, and second-time surrogates would be around $50,000. Now, this range is going to depend on your gestational carrier's profile, her experience, her education, her job category, and it's also going to depend on the agency's policies regarding compensation. Now, if you're working with an agency, each agency is known to have their own standard benefits package, and those benefits vary. And it depends on the agency, and it can depend on the location. And you probably remember that I said there are 2 types of compensation under this benefits package, right? So let's go ahead and look at those real quick. They're number 1, additional compensation, and number 2, as needed compensation. Additional, as needed. Let's look at additional compensation first. I call this additional compensation because this compensation is given to a surrogate in addition to the base compensation. So for instance, you have the $40,000 base compensation that's paid out in increments as she's pregnant. And then you have these additional payment compensation items that are not necessarily directly resulting from the pregnancy, but they're part of the surrogacy arrangement. You can think about it like this. The base compensation is what you would call pregnancy payments, while the payment that's given out in these additional compensations are just ancillary payments. Here's an example of an additional compensation amount. Lost wages. So each time your surrogate is required to take time off work to attend a doctor's appointment or maybe even be put on bed rest or limited activity, and she's not allowed to work, she would typically get reimbursed for the amount of compensation she loses because she is being your surrogate and she's on bed rest because of that. That's a perfect example. Also, think about travel compensation, travel allowances. If your surrogate is required to travel long distances, which are typically considered more than 50 miles from her home, then she'll be compensated or given a per diem for food, and also she'd get the travel paid for. That's another example of additional payments. That leaves us with the last category, as needed compensation. Now, the as needed compensation category consists of some things that I tell my surrogate clients, I hope you don't get paid for this. All money isn't fun money, and these payments are payments that I hope you don't get. Let's look at a few and you'll understand what I mean. The first as needed compensation category I'll talk about are cancellation fees. Now, the cancellation fees apply if the intended parents decide not to move forward, they change their mind, but it's after the surrogate has already begun injecting herself with medication. The next category I'll mention is multiples pregnancy. So if she's pregnant with multiples, there's typically a bump in that compensation amount. Another category of as needed compensation would be compensation for having a C-section birth. A C-section is a major surgery, so it comes with that additional compensation element to compensate for the fact that the surrogate will be cut open and have a major surgery. Also, something to keep in mind, and this is something that I hope we never see, is a partial or full loss of reproductive organs. If for any reason your surrogate, because she went through this process, loses her ability to reproduce, she loses an ovary or a fallopian tube, or has to have a complete hysterectomy, then typically there's going to be something in the benefits package that allows her some additional compensation to cover that. So hopefully this gives you an idea of what you can expect or what you should be expecting once you go into your surrogacy arrangement. Now, if you're thinking about the surrogacy process and you need to know how to do it right, make sure you click the link below for a free resource I have for you. It's my formula for successful surrogacy, and I base it on my 3T surrogacy methodology. That's the 3 things you must have in place in order to have a successful surrogacy journey. Now, the first of the 3 T's is team. I'll just let you click the link below and see what the other 2 are. But make sure you get your hands on this free resource, and I'll see you in the next episode.